This is House Planning Help episode 215. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up, it's a solo session about my own build, which is halfway through. So I'm reflecting on 10 things I've learned during construction. Before we get into that list, I wanted to give you a quick reminder that I'm heading to the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre on the 11th and 12th of May 2018. Always enjoy attending their shows, and I get to do a presentation which will largely be on my build, but also some of the themes that keep on coming up, maybe on the podcast, things that I think will accelerate you on your journey, because that's what we like to do here, just observe things and then try and point them out at these presentations. And it's so much fun for this particular one because we're talking about construction, and in the past I've just been dreaming for a while on some of them, and then buying land, which was exciting to announce, and then talking through the design process and to actually have some photos. Look, this is the house as it is today. Will be very, very exciting. Look, it's got a roof on. Look, it's got windows in. It actually looks like a house. So that's coming up on the 11th and 12th of May. If that event has been and gone, don't forget that we always update our events page. So houseplanninghelp.com/events will let you know whatever we have coming up. Maybe I'm off to speak somewhere else. So the podcast today is mainly some observations as we've gone through the construction process. They're not hugely technical or anything like that, but just things that you pick up on that perhaps you wouldn't know necessarily if you hadn't been through the process. It's what I'm always trying to do, just reveal as much as I can. So let's start off. Well, number one is things move quickly. Is it one of those lists again? Why have you put this on the list? Well, I think it's a really good point, good observation here, because you've just done so much dreaming. You want to build this house, and perhaps you've faced a few brick walls that you've had to bash down to get your land and then get your finance sorted and all the regular bits and pieces, put the team together, that so much of this just, it's meaningless. It's just in the air. And then finally you start building. And if you're like me, you're going to site regularly every 2 to 3 days, and you just notice the progress. You can see it happening every day. Something has changed. And so this is an illusion, really, this first point. Of course, it's not going quickly. You have a schedule. It tells you exactly when things are going to happen, when you're going to move into the house. That's the big advantage of going down the contractor route. We're using our architect as the contract administrator as well. And you just feel like you're in safe hands. I think going down this route, you're probably going to be on track. In fact, in our case, we're ahead of schedule. So I'm saying this is the first observation, that it feels like things are moving quickly. And probably what it is, it's just a sigh of relief that we're actually getting something that looks like a building. Also, my second point is that the team working on site can change a lot. I like to go on site. I like to remember everyone's name if I can. And there have been times where I thought, oh my goodness, there are new people on site. And that makes sense, I suppose, when you have subcontractors. But I suppose using a local contractor, one of the advantages, you would imagine the team would be exactly the same every day. Well, of course, that's never going to be the case, because how can you expect any one person to be able to do everything? Although I think that that is a skill that local contractors seem to have, that they can operate excavators, telehandlers, do all the carpentry, lay blocks, put in windows, put in insulation, whatever it is, they seem to have that skill. And there are certain things that they don't like to go near. I think when we interviewed our contractor Mark, he was saying, yeah, plumbing and electrics, I can do all that stuff, but no, let's get another team in to do that. So with a lot of subbies, the other thing is that they might bring in someone where they think, these guys are bricklayers, they do it day in, day out. Yes, I can lay bricks, but they can do it really fast, because that's just what they do every single day. So expect your team to expand and change over the days. Let's move on to the third point, and this is the flow of materials to and then around the site is half of the progress. Yes, you're not going to have a house unless everything is put together on site. But if you haven't got those materials there in the first place and they're not in the right place, and you actually see that certain people, that you begin to understand the labourer's role is really just lining everything up so that someone can continue their work instead of stopping every 2 seconds and going back and mixing cement or having to bring the materials to them. There is a person constantly making them ready for the next steps of progressing the building. And the bigger the team, the more of these people you need helping and moving materials. And I think one of the best days that illustrated that for me was the beam and block floor, because that goes in so quickly. They have these precast concrete beams, they line them up on the dwarf walls that they have, and then they just put in these blocks. And you get through quite a lot of blocks, so the blocks are heavy, they need to be coming to site, so really you could just see the telehandler moving all the blocks around, then someone getting the blocks ready for the people just to lay into those spaces. And with a lot of people, you obviously make a lot of progress, so it's all over in a single day. And there are definitely days like that on site. While we're talking about the beam and block floor, that's a video we've recently added to the YouTube channel. I've been vlogging. It's obviously not been as regular as I might have hoped. I wanted to do it every 2 weeks, but life has just got in the way a little bit. So youtube.com/house planning help. We'll get there when we can. Number 4, the quality of the build is a team effort. And yes, this is a painfully obvious statement, isn't it? However, I wonder whether certain construction methods are less dependent on people than others. And that's why I say this, because going down the masonry route, you have a lot of people on site and they're laying block, insulation. And as you go through, there are just various different elements. Maybe it's mixing the cement. Is it the right consistency? So you need your team on top form. And I suppose there is a risk that if you have someone who's perhaps not firing at 100%, that it could get missed and it just becomes part of your build. So perhaps in the future, are we looking to technology or just ways of building in a factory and then erecting on site so that your team are not so dependent on the final quality of the build? Number 5, and a few of these are about clients now. So as clients, you need to keep ahead of the decisions. And I find this funny in a way because we obviously went out to tender, so you pack in the detail there. We've got an interior designer, which I think has really helped with a number of the decisions. Yet for all that it's worth, somehow we seem to be making a lot of decisions and some things are not as concrete as perhaps we would have liked. That's definitely the way if you can go into the tender process nailing everything down. Yes, I get that. I think for a first-time self-builder, that's a very hard thing to do, to get on top of all of that. And I do think it's a huge blessing on this project that my wife, Kay, in her previous roles in London, she was a project manager for quite big companies in terms of their marketing. So she's very at home with a spreadsheet, which would be my idea of hell, putting together our own specifications and checking and double checking. Number 6, another one, as clients, there's a huge benefit of regular site visits. So we could look at this at different levels as well, because I think it's just great to have that relationship with your builder. I keep on asking the question, you happy? Is everything okay? And also just for picking up on little things. I'll give you an example. I was on site a couple of days ago and our MVHR ducting has been done. And when you complete it into the rooms, if it hasn't got the right connections on the end, you just put a plastic bag around it and tape it up so no dust gets in there. That's fine. It had been done on all, but I noticed one of them and I thought, well, hold on, today is a really dusty day. They're soaring through lots of bits and pieces. And there's this one entrance. Is it possible that the dust could just go all the way into the ducting? And so putting those bits of plastic over the other sides might be pointless. So I just mentioned it to one of the guys. 2 seconds later, it's all covered up. If I hadn't been there, who's to say it would have got covered? It might have done, but you just don't know. And there are lots of little things like that. It's also just great to see what's under your house because things will get covered up. So if you're there every 2 to 3 days, you can just see, oh, this is my house. Oh, that's what's going in there. Because I think there's quite a bit of trust as well that when things get covered up is, if I haven't seen it myself, is what we had spec'd actually in the house. And then there's a good point that this is your build. You really should be enjoying it. And getting to site, as far as I'm concerned, is very enjoyable. I've loved going to other people's sites. It's so much better when it's your own site. And that's interesting. We move on to our next point. There are days when obviously you wish it wasn't your site, when problems arise. And I wanted to mention that on the whole, I think they can be solved. I'd love to say here that they can all be solved, but I'm not going to. I'd just say they generally can be solved. And the whole way through the process, you get these times when things crop out of the woodwork and maybe you're tearing your hair out. And sometimes it's just a matter of hours before those things go away and you're back to enjoying your project. So just remember that when something really drastic happens and you're not enjoying it. We have had moments where just before we were about to build, there were some issues with some services crossing the site. There were some issues with setting out. There was a window order that, when you place this 25 grand window order and then suddenly you realize that something on it is wrong and it's all computerized. So have they started making the windows already? And a delay over how to fit the windows. All these things at the time, it feels bad, but there's a way through. And so far, I think just keeping on top of the project, if you can do that, you catch them going by and you can deal with them when they're going by. Number 8, best made plans might need to change. So fairly early on, I got this advice that you shouldn't really change your mind as you enter the construction phase. And this is very, very sound advice because there are knock-on effects and you don't want these. However, I wonder whether this applies to little things. If you're talking about a change in design to the building, that is drastic and you don't want to go there. Sometimes, though, I've held off once I've thought I've made this decision and then it comes back to get you at night time. Silly things like the bathrooms upstairs. I think we had one bathroom too many, and I probably talked about this on the podcast before, thinking, what do we do? Do we just, we've made that decision, build the bathroom, it's too late, or the oven being under the hob, when I really should have said I want one that's in a stand-up unit so I can get to it there. And those things I've held back for a bit, but when it's come to it in the end, there has been that opportunity to change. And so I just want to say that you might have heard that advice about not changing your mind, and there is definitely wisdom in that. But with some things, so the bathroom, what ended up happening is we just said, can we just leave it as a storage room? We know we're a family that ends up with lots of junk, so let's create a place for it. And once you've got a place for it, you'll fill it up with junk as well. So I'm quite pleased that we've got that storage area or flexible space. It could be used for other things too. Then I'm thinking of the electrical plan. This is a funny one. When we put the tender documents out, you obviously have to check them and go through them. And looking at the electrical plan, we thought we'd worked out, so yeah, the sockets here, that all looks good. And then when we walked around with the electrician, it was surprising how much changed or how many extra little decisions needed to be made. Where exactly do you want this switch in the room? What height? You've got these pendants hanging down in the master bedroom. So where exactly are they going to come through the ceiling? And you have to decide that before the first fix is completed. So yeah, I thought that was worth popping on here, that some of your plans might need to change or adapt. Hopefully not in a big way, though. Number 9, masonry construction feels old-fashioned. And I suppose I knew that coming into the process, but it's interesting to watch sometimes when you think of I-beams and how they seem very adaptable to Passivhaus and then some of the factory techniques where things are built in the factories and then shipped out and glued together in a few seconds. Well, masonry construction does feel the old-fashioned way. Let's get out the string lines. Let's mix the cement. It's very messy on site. Tolerances perhaps not as good as they would be with other methods. Yet it's a conundrum here, isn't it? Because it's not that simple. This is often the cheapest way to go. The skills are there. It's familiar, and I'm sure we'll come back to this in time. How do you change an industry? I'm not saying I've got any answers. And finally, number 10, being a client is a full-time job. I don't know what we're going to do when we get to the end of this build, because we're going to have quite a lot of time back. This is 2 of us, I am fairly flexible with my work, which is both a good and a bad thing. I haven't had any hobbies, you could say, that I've managed to maintain cooking. We haven't resorted to too many microwave meals. Things like going out on runs. I used to go out on 3 runs a week, and sometimes I managed to pull that off, but largely with the young family as well, time is just so precious. And visiting showrooms, reading brochures, answering emails, all of these things take up time. So don't be under the illusion that you can get this all done in the evenings, because when you get to the evenings, if you've been working all day, you're not going to want to do all of this stuff. You need to be fresh. Or maybe, I suppose, the other way of looking at it is if you can free up all of your weekends for all the major decision making, then I suppose that is a way that you could go. And I'm going to give you one bonus one, which didn't quite make it onto the list, but is very relevant if you have young kids. And that is, kids and building sites are not a good match. Yes, again, painfully obvious. However, I thought it was worth mentioning because you want to include your children. This is a family home that we're building here. And so maybe not all the time, but a couple of times during the process, you want to bring them to site. I'd recommend those early days when the diggers are out, and watch out for them falling in the mud. That seems to be the main draw. Forget about the house. It is the mud they're interested in. However, recently when we've gone onto the site and I've made sure I'm holding onto your hand, it's not easy because you get dragged around places, but oh look, I can go through the stud walls and chase me around here. So I just wanted to say, because I think your contractor as well will just be on edge, just thinking, will they get safely off the building site? But you can get all the high vis and the hard hat and make sure they're safe in that respect. However, I don't think, no, don't bring kids onto the site if you can possibly help it. That's where we're going to wrap up today. You can check out the show notes at houseplanninghelp.com/215, where you can review my list once again. We'll throw in a few photos of the build. As I mentioned earlier, pretty much halfway through now. We've had an air tightness test, the first one. We've got 2 more of those to go. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, then scroll down to the bottom of the show notes. That's the place to do it there. We'll also link in vlog number 2, the beam and block floor that I mentioned earlier, houseplanninghelp.com/215. So a shorter episode today. That sometimes happens when we do a solo show. But my call to action is a simple one, and that is to spread the word. If you found this interesting or you've got value from other podcasts in the series, we'd just love you to tell a friend. And I know maybe that won't apply tomorrow or the next day, but when someone says, oh, I'm building a house, I'd like to go as eco as possible, or I'd like to understand some of the issues that face builders here in the UK, then please usher them my way, and that would be much appreciated. There we go, all done for another session. Thank you for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.